Hello, and welcome back. This video is about hooking up the volume logic to the user interface. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. So now that we have the sound classes and game user settings both set up in the previous videos, we need to make them work together. And since we need access to these functions in a few specific spots, we'll add it to our Blueprint function library. So I'm going to initially add a getVolume. This will take in a sound class. The purpose of the sound class here is really just to compare. So this is a sound class type. And it's going to return the volume. So that's a float. So the first thing we're doing is calling our get game user settings. We're just going to save that so it's convenient. We call it td_gus. And I'm going to throw in a sequence. So in here, we're taking the variable we sent in, the sound class. We're going to compare it. And if it's the sc_master, we want to use our game user settings and call get master volume, which is then what we're returning. So that's the basic flow. And we have to do it 2 more times in this sequence for the sound effects and music. Unfortunately, the sound class, we can't do a switch on it because it's not a type that's switchable. So we can copy most of this and just duplicate it twice. This will be for our sc_sound effects and sc_music. So then this is get sound effects volume and get music volume. So we can duplicate this function then because we want a lot of the same functionality. And this will be SetVolume. Instead of the volume being an output, now it's an input, and I don't think you can drag it up there. That would be handy. So we're doing all the same up until the sequence. Well, just past the sequence. We still want to compare those 3 values, and then instead of calling get, we're calling set. So set master volume. Get rid of the return nodes. And then this is the value we sent in, so get volume as a variable. Set sound effects volume and set music volume. And lastly, we want to make sure that we call the apply, but for that we can just do it all down here. Just copy paste this and call apply settings. Now that will set the value to the game user settings. We also want it to actually apply to the game, so we're going to then put our set sound mix class override followed by push sound mix modifier. In both cases, we just use the SCM we created. And we have our sound class sent in and our volume. So with that done, we can go back into our main menu widget blueprint. And in here, we can now remove this. And I'm going to rehook this back up for this video and create inside of our main menu a new user widget. We'll call this WBP Audio Options. I'm going to start with a border with this nice flashbang color. Drop this way down to very dark gray. Inside the border, we want a vertical box. And the top of the vertical box, we'll just throw in text, which we can center and put audio options. We'll throw in a spacer. This one we just make 10 by 10. And lastly, we want a horizontal box for each of the settings. So inside of each horizontal box, we're going to have a text value, a spacer, and a slider. First text value, we can just call master. For the slider, we want to name it so we can use it. So we'll call it master slider. Make sure it's a variable. We click the button down here, which will take us to the graph. And then we want to set all three of these to fill. So this value, typically I do numbers that add up to 1.0. That's not required. The 1.0 is just what it uses by default. It doesn't matter what numbers you put in here. It's just going to add all the numbers up and then create the space depending on the ratio of that value. So I set this to 30. You can see nothing changes because it's 30, 30, 30, and it's each is still 1/3, right? So I'm going to set the spacer then to 5 and the slider to 65. So the total is 100. And then I can take this horizontal box and duplicate it twice. For the first one, we'll say sound effects. And rename this to sound effects slider. And similarly down here, music slider with a name of music. And then in our graph, I'm going to grab sound effects slider here, hit that button, music slider, hit that button. And when we're changing the value or responding to changing the value, all we're needing to do is calling the SetVolume we just created and sending along this value. The slider's default is 0 to 1, so it works for our volume. I'll just copy this and paste it twice more. This one is for music, sound effects, and master. And then lastly, we want a function. We can call this update sliders. When this UI is created, we call this update sliders to make sure our slider values are what we have for the values of the volumes. So then in that case, we're just calling get volume. First for the master, and then we're using our master slider to call set value and sending along that volume. And then we're doing the same thing 2 more times. sound effects. And music. So the last thing that we want to do, because it will mess up our testing if we forget, is in game instance we had initially in our init done some testing with the master volume, setting it to 0.25. So as it is, actually if we just hit play now, you can hear the music. And it's at full volume because the volume value was set to 1 by default. But if we go into options, which I forgot to add the option value for, let me do that. So back in our WBP options, we want to make sure user created is open, and we can just throw in audio options onto our canvas panel. Let's control shift this to the center, move it out, let's say 400, make it a size of 400 by 200. Oh, 600 by 200. There we go. So now when we hit play and go to options, the volume is full, even though this says this up here. Go into options, and you hear it go down. It fades down to 0.25, and the master was set to 0.25. So that is because our game instance is doing that. What we actually want in our game instance now is we want to get our game user settings. I'm going to do this in a sequence. And here all we're doing is we're calling get volume for each of our sound classes and calling set volume on it. So it's a little redundant because we're getting this from the game user settings and then we're setting it to the game user settings, except the second part of set volume is also setting the actual sound volumes. So we can then just copy and paste this 3 times, or 2 times. And make sure that we're setting our sound classes properly here. So then if we test like this, we go in here, we have our volume is actually at 1, go back into options, it fades down to 0.25. So clearly putting it in game instance didn't work, but why is that? So this is doing similar to what it was doing before. We're doing a get volume and a set volume. So for the game user settings, works fine. However, in our set volume, we also are calling these 2 functions, which both take a world context object. When game instance is first initialized, there is no world context object because that has to do with the level or the map that you're loaded into. So that makes this a not good place to call this. So instead, we can cut this. And we want to put it into our game mode. So for our main menu, we have our own game mode here. And we throw it in begin play here. So then we hit play again. And you may have been able to hear it started at 1 and then faded out to 0.25. So that fade is just based on the value here. So if we don't like that, we can set that to 0. And as soon as we hit play, it's at that value. It didn't get faded down. So let's test these. It's master volume, mute, full, works. If we set that up and set the music down, it also fades it out. And then for the sound effects, we have that pop sound. We set the sound effects down to 0, no pop sound. Throw it at about 0.25, a quiet pop sound. And same thing with the master volume. And just a reminder, if you have this in your main menu game mode, you're going to want to also include it in the game mode if you have sounds, which you likely do in your actual gameplay. So that would be then in just Blueprints game mode. And you can throw it in here as well. You can throw it on the end of here, or if you wanted the end there, this is fine. Don't have any sounds in this project, but nonetheless, that's where it goes. Now, the last thing you want to do, I'm not going to use up time in the video to do it, but you should always do a package after you do any significant amount of steps. The audio files will be included, so then it should just all work fine, but it's always good to test. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the partridge files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.